In this video, I will tell you about Henry Hill, a gangster whose life story formed the basis of the cult film Goodfellas. I will tell you that in reality, Henry didn't really dream of becoming a gangster as far back as he could remember. I will tell you what actually caused the murder of Billy Batts, and I will also tell you what kind of cruel and violent person Paulie Wario was, unlike the judicious and sage man who was depicted in the movie. Henry Hill Jr. was born on June 11, 1943, in a poor neighborhood of Brooklyn, New York City. His father was Irish, and his mother was Italian from Sicily. In addition to Henry, there were 6 other children in the family. In the film, the episode about Henry's childhood immediately sets the tone and creates an image of a cool little hooligan, from whom a real gangster will later emerge. However, in reality, it was somewhat different. To maintain the image in the film, they deliberately did not mention that Henry had major problems with his school performance due to dyslexia, which was not diagnosed in time. Added to this was attention deficit and hyperactivity disorders. According to Henry Hill's memories, he couldn't even fully read the national anthem. Teachers thought Henry was doing it on purpose and often scolded him in front of the whole class, then placed him in the corner. Henry certainly doesn't talk about this himself, but I think it's not hard to guess that with such a background he was, to put it mildly, not the coolest guy in the school. That's probably why he started skipping school for months. Henry did not receive individualized attention from teachers. Moreover, his hard-working father regularly beat him for his poor performance and truancy. Henry started spending more time on the streets. Hill's favorite place became a taxi stand not far from his home. The owner of the taxi stand was Paulie Wario, in the movie Paulie Cicero. Paul was a capo in the Lucchese crime family, which was one of the 5 families controlling organized crime in New York. Therefore, gangsters often visited the taxi stand. Henry Hill liked to hang out there and talk to criminals because they treated him decently, unlike the teachers at school and his own father. Moreover, Hill saw the outward signs of success in criminal life: expensive suits and gold jewelry, luxury cars, and beautiful women surrounding gangsters. And most importantly, he saw the superiority of these people over everyone else. It's not surprising that young Henry Hill wanted to become one of them. Henry Hill began his criminal career by performing small tasks assigned to him by Paulie Wario and his people. Henry delivered packages, passed on information, and parked cars. Henry was just ecstatic to be part of it all. Over time, the tasks he was given became more serious. Instead of delivering packages, Hill was pushing stolen cigarettes. Instead of parking cars, he was sabotaging the cars of competitors and debtors. At the age of 16, just like in the movie, Henry Hill was arrested for the first time. He learned 2 important life lessons: not to betray friends and to keep his mouth shut. That's exactly what he did, earning immense respect from Paulie Wario and the others. However, the film does not show Henry's doubts about the correctness of the path that he has chosen. As Henry immersed himself deeper into the criminal world, he quickly began to see its darker realities, dispelling any illusions of glamour or romance. Henry began to wonder if he really needed such a life. It was during this time that his arrest came, which only strengthened his doubts. In the film, after the arrest of young 16-year-old Henry, the events immediately jumped to the year 1963, when Henry was already 21 years old. Such a sharp leap was made to avoid prematurely dismantling his image on screen, portraying a guy who had dreamed of being a gangster all his life. In reality, in 1960, at the age of 17, Henry was drafted into military service in the 82nd Airborne Division. Hill left New York for 3 years, which helped him distance himself from the criminal world for a while. Unfortunately, however, Henry couldn't distance himself from his criminal habits. While in the service, he engaged in gambling, drank alcohol, and participated in the illicit sale of products from the Army kitchen. Things escalated to the point where Henry was convicted by a military court for a fight and stealing a car belonging to the local sheriff. After returning to New York in 1963, Henry continued to work for Paulie Wario. He hoped to accumulate a decent sum of money and start his own legitimate business. In the same year, he met an experienced gangster and his future mentor, Jimmy Burke. Jimmy Burke became the prototype for Jimmy Conway, a character in the film portrayed on screen by Robert De Niro. Jimmy Burke began his criminal career with car theft. Because he had been leaving money for the drivers who were affected by his activities, he earned the nickname The Gentleman. In the early 1960s, Burke worked under Paulie Wario. He was involved in the illegal distribution of cigarettes and alcoholic beverages, as well as specializing in robberies. Burke's Irish roots prevented him from attaining a high position within the Lucchese crime family. He was an inconsistent figure, possessing both an analytical mind and bouts of uncontrolled cruelty. Rumors circulated that Jimmy murdered and dismembered his former fiance's ex-boyfriend. The reasons for such behavior most likely lie in his troubled childhood. As a child, Burke was cared for by several foster families and was repeatedly sexually abused. When Jimmy was 13 years old, he got into an accident due to an argument with his foster father while they were in the car. Burke was hardly injured, but his foster parent died on the spot. Under Jimmy Burke's wing, in addition to Henry Hill, there was also a very young Italian gangster named Tommy DeSimone. DeSimone became the prototype for Tommy DeVito, a character in the movie portrayed on screen by Joe Pesci. Tommy had been involved with the mafia since childhood. His grandfather and his uncle held high positions in the Los Angeles mob. Henry Hill described his first impression of Tommy. He was a tall, skinny kid with a wispy mustache who did his best to look like a gangster. And Tommy did so much to be considered dangerous that he managed to earn a reputation as a truly frightening person, even among gangsters. He always carried a .38 caliber Colt in a paper bag and could use his weapon without reason. His nicknames, such as Animal or Crazy Tommy, spoke for themselves. Although Pesci was significantly shorter and older than the real-life prototype of his character, he brilliantly embodied the role. Joe Pesci won an Oscar for his performance in this role. The scene from the movie during a card game, where Tommy at first shot the bartender known as Spider in the foot because he didn't bring him a drink on time, is entirely real. Also, a week later, Tommy shot Spider because he tried to stand up to him verbally. However, unlike what was shown in the film, the first time Tommy shot Spider in the thigh, not in the foot. In 1965, under the guidance of Jimmy Burke, Henry and Tommy became involved in hijacking trucks leaving Kennedy Airport. Burke's hijacking system was honed to perfection, allowing them to strip about 3 trucks a day. The scale of the hijackings was so shocking that the U.S. government even released a special film warning truck drivers. However, it was futile because, according to Henry, about 75% of the drivers were on the mafia's payroll. Some of the airport security guards were also being paid off. One such guard, an Irishman nicknamed Frenchie, gave Henry Hill a tip-off that during his shift in the Air France terminal storage, there would be a round sum from $400,000 to $700,000. All that was needed was to enter the airport under the pretext of having lost luggage, collect the money, and leave the building. Henry informed Jimmy Burke about the plan. They involved Tommy DeSimone and together began to execute the robbery. The only complexity not mentioned in the film was that Frenchie did not have the key to the storage. The key was with the senior guard, who was not on the mafia's payroll. They solved the problem by having Frenchie become close to his colleague, and he found out that the guard was a big fan of prostitutes. They decided to use this to their advantage. Frenchie brought his colleague to a rendezvous with a prostitute in a motel. While the girl distracted the attention of the key owner, Frenchie managed to make a mold unnoticed. After the key had been made, Henry and Tommy effortlessly entered the cargo compartment of the Air France plane and without a single shot took out $420,000. Adjusting for inflation, in today's value, it's slightly over $3 million. Henry Hill, Jimmy Burke and Tommy DeSimone, after pulling off such a heist, not only earned big money but also gained universal respect. Paulie Wario got his tribute as in the movie. As I mentioned earlier, in reality, Henry was not as satisfied with his criminal lifestyle. After the airline heist, Henry had enough money to pursue a legitimate business. He bought a club called Sweet in Queens and actively began managing it. Henry intended to gradually step away from criminal activities. However, his acquaintances, including Jimmy and Tommy, started frequenting his club. This led to the club turning into a criminal den where gangsters brought prostitutes and organized massive parties. Gangsters often enjoyed themselves at the club without paying, which also negatively impacted Henry Hill's business. In the movie, as you may recall, gangsters also had a good time without paying at another establishment, ultimately leading to its closure. In the film, to avoid tarnishing Henry's gangster image, they did not develop the theme of his unsuccessful attempt to become an honest businessman. The real Henry Hill never lost hope of breaking free from the criminal life, but in 1970, an event would occur that would put an end to all his plans. Gangster William Bentvena, also known as Billy Bats, was released from prison, where he had served time for illegal drug trafficking. In honor of Billy's return, Jimmy Burke organized a party at his nightclub, not at Henry Hill's club as depicted in the movie. Tommy DeSimone was also present at the club party. A conflict arose between Tommy and Billy Bats due to a joke Bats made. Like in the movie, he asked Tommy if he still shined shoes, which Tommy took as a personal insult. However, in reality, there was another nuance that wasn't mentioned in the film. While Billy Bats was in prison, Jimmy Burke, portrayed by Robert De Niro, watched over his business. Burke was impressed by the highly profitable illegal substances trafficking and came up with a genius plan. He provoked his friend, Tommy DeSimone, which is Joe Pesci's character, suggesting that Tommy was disrespected and publicly insulted, and they couldn't let that go unanswered. Burke and DeSimone agreed to kill Billy Bats 2 weeks after the altercation. This is why Burke was so eager to help, not because he was such a great guy always ready to help a friend, but because he acted from mercenary motives. Together with DeSimone, they beat Bats until they thought he was dead. This murder differed from dozens of others committed by Burke and DeSimone by one significant fact. Billy Bats was a member of the influential Gambino crime family. Bats had serious backing and held a high position in the mafia, granting him untouchable status. Nobody had the right to harm Bats without permission from their boss. Additionally, Billy had very influential friends, including John Gotti, who would later become the boss of the Gambino family. Therefore, they had to carefully cover their tracks. They drove Bats's body in the trunk of a car. As in the film, they had to make a stop at Tommy's mother's house to get a knife and shovel. Interestingly, in the film, the role of Tommy's mother was played by Catherine Scorsese, the mother of the film's director. The moment when Billy Bats, while in the trunk, exhibited signs of life and therefore was actually killed in that very trunk was not a fabrication. It was a chilling reality. According to Henry Hill, it was just sickening. Henry was also sickened by the realization that he was now involved in the murder of a high-ranking member of the Gambino family. His chances of getting out of the game alive were now zero. Moreover, he knew exactly what his friends, Jimmy Burke and Tommy DeSimone, were capable of and didn't want to give them any reason to be nervous about him. So Henry continued to work for the mafia and did whatever he was told. In 1972, after a botched business trip in Tampa, Henry Hill and Jimmy Burke found themselves behind bars. In Tampa, they had brutally assaulted a man named Gaspar Ciaccio, a card player who owed a substantial sum of money to Paulie Wario. Unfortunately, it turned out that a relative of the victim worked for the FBI. Viewing this as a personal affront, the FBI decided to stage a high-profile trial. The agents even managed to pressure Paulie Wario himself. By the way, Paulie Wario was not depicted entirely accurately. In the movie, he's always level-headed, never swayed by emotions, and calmly resolves his subordinates' family issues. However, in reality, Vario often settled family disputes with a baseball bat. A young Henry Hill once witnessed Vario beat his woman with a bat to near death. On another occasion, Vario took another woman out for dinner at a nice restaurant. While they were dining, the waiter accidentally spilled wine on his date's dress. Enraged, Vario struck the poor waiter twice. Later that same night, he sent 2 cars full of mob soldiers armed with baseball bats and pipes to beat up the whole waitstaff. That is the real Paul Vario for you. For the beating of an FBI employee's relative, Henry Hill was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Additionally, they managed to prove Henry's involvement in illegal gambling, insult the honor of the FBI, and they really start to work properly. Members of the Lucchese family served their sentences together, and as shown in the film, even in prison, they maintained a special status. That is how corrupt the penitentiary system was back then. Paul Vario paid the prison guards $3,000 every month for this privileged status. By the way, the role of the prison cook was also played by a relative of the director, his father, Charles Scorsese. In prison, Henry Hill first experimented with drugs. It was there that he realized the immense sums that could be made from selling illegal substances. The money he had earned from hijacking trucks didn't come close. After serving 5 years in prison, Henry Hill ventured into the drug trade, starting with marijuana and then moving on to powder. His connections and knowledge of distribution channels gained in prison quickly helped him integrate into the drug business. Then he promptly involved Jimmy and Tommy in his new venture. As depicted in the film, Paul Vario was vehemently against any involvement with illicit substances. As a capo in the Lucchese crime family, Vario was already well off, and he saw the drug trade as an unnecessary risk. Despite the astronomical profits, every drug dealer risked receiving equally astronomical sentences. Paul Vario understood this and didn't want to spend his remaining days behind bars. If rumors reached Paul about Henry, Jimmy, and Tommy's involvement in the drug trade, they would all be dead. Additionally, there's another reason why Paul vehemently opposed drugs, but I'll tell you about it later. In addition to distributing illegal substances, Henry helped to plan one of the largest and most audacious heists in U.S. history for Jimmy Burke. It became known as the Lufthansa heist. The process of the robbery occurs off-screen in the film, so let's delve into it a bit more. On December 11, 1978, around 3 a.m., 6 masked men stormed into a building at Kennedy Airport. Tommy DeSimone was one of the robbers. They tied up all the airport employees who were in the warehouse's break room at the time. The masked men were well informed about the families of the warehouse workers, so none of the hostages dared to attempt to raise the alarm. Lufthansa, a German carrier, had a safe which was located in its section of the airport. The only security guard who knew the safe code readily gave the robbers the password. Large sums of cash were destined for West German servicemen and awaited shipment directly to the airport's vault. The robbers managed to make off with around $6 million. Airport police could have blocked all exits within 90 seconds, but they only learned about the robbery 15 minutes after the criminals left in a van. The heist lasted only 64 minutes and became the largest cash theft in U.S. history at the time. The planning and execution of the robbery were flawless, but things didn't go as planned afterward. One of the robbers, Parnell Edwards, was supposed to dispose of the van. However, instead, he got high on marijuana and went to sniff powder at his girlfriend's place, leaving the van in a restricted parking zone. The police took the van to an impound lot where they quickly determined that this vehicle had been used in the Lufthansa robbery. The FBI knew that Edwards was connected to Burke. However, the feds didn't have time to dig deeper in that direction because Edwards was soon killed. Tommy DeSimone disposed of him on Burke's orders. Soon, they began eliminating other accomplices. Burke started killing associates not only to secure all the money, but to prevent the FBI from getting close to him. After the van debacle, Jimmy Burke became truly paranoid, and within 6 months, 10 people connected to the robbery were eliminated. Burke ruthlessly cut all ties. Henry Hill and Tommy DeSimone didn't give Burke any reason to worry because they were smarter than the rest and spent their ill-gotten gains cautiously. On January 14, 1979, Tommy DeSimone's wife reported to the police that her husband had gone missing. At that time, Henry Hill and Jimmy Burke were in Florida, trying to resolve a botched drug deal. Tommy decided not to join them and stayed in New York, as he was expected to be promoted within the Lucchese family at the beginning of January. However, this promotion never materialized. The last time Tommy DeSimone was seen was in a car with 2 gangsters who drove him away in an unknown direction. One of the gangsters in the car was Peter Vario, the son of Paulie Wario. No traces of Tommy were ever found. The case of his disappearance remains unsolved. What is depicted in the movie is just one version of what happened. It is believed that Tommy DeSimone was killed by the Gambino family to avenge the murder of Billy Batts. In April 1980, Henry Hill was arrested during another regular drug deal. Just like in the movie, after he had been released on bail, Hill feared for his life. For Paulie Wario and Jimmy Burke, Hill's release on bail was grounds to suspect him of cooperation with the authorities. Soon, Henry realized that he was being targeted for elimination and decided to make a deal with the justice system. For the FBI, Henry became a real gem. Firstly, Hill was involved in planning the Lufthansa heist, which meant he could help the FBI gather evidence against Burke. Secondly, Henry's position within the family was very unique. He knew and worked with a vast array of gangsters from different backgrounds and statuses, meaning he could provide valuable information about many made guys. Usually, if a criminal was involved in the illegal substances trade, they didn't see or know anything beyond that realm. Such isolation within the criminal structure helped ensure safety for the leaders, as this activity carried enormous sentences. Under the weight of such a huge penalty, anyone, even a pure-blooded Sicilian who had imbibed the omerta law with their mother's milk, could crack. That's why in the Italian mafia, everyone except the foot soldiers were strictly prohibited from directly dealing with drugs. Henry Hill was far from stupid and understood perfectly well that every day of delay could cost him his life, as he could be eliminated either in prison or on the outside. However, he still feared cooperation with the feds. The main reason for his apprehension was the stupidity of the federal agents themselves. In the movie, Jimmy Burke told Henry who had set him up, causing the DEA to hunt him. In reality, Hill found out himself when he accidentally read the informant's name in his file, which FBI agents brought to his cell. Apparently, they forgot to redact it. Learning this, Henry doubted that he and his family could be properly protected. There is a theory that Henry decided to cooperate because he had money stashed away. Additionally, many people owed him. This is unlike the movie, where he inexplicably ends up destitute. It's believed he was busy collecting debts and securing his money while out on bail. However, this is just a theory. In any case, Henry eventually agreed to the deal. He gave up everyone he could, and in return, he and his family were placed in the Witness Protection Program, and all charges against him were dropped. As a result of Hill's testimony, Jimmy Burke received a life sentence. He died in prison on April 13, 1996. Paulie Wario went to prison for 4 years, but then, due to new charges, his sentence was extended by another 10 years. He also spent his last years behind bars and died from lung failure on May 3, 1988. In 1981, Hill met writer Nicholas Pileggi. As a result, Pileggi's book, Wise Guy, was published, which served as the basis for Martin Scorsese's cult gangster film. However, the real Henry Hill can hardly be called a wise guy. Life didn't teach Hill much. He continued to deal drugs and, in general, treated the law with little respect. Eventually, his wife Karen Friedman left him. Later, Hill was removed from the witness protection program due to numerous violations of the law. Henry repeatedly attended rehabilitation programs, but he never managed to break free from drugs and alcohol. He spent his last years in Southern California. On June 12, 2012, one day after his 69th birthday, Hill passed away in a Los Angeles hospital. The cause of death was heart failure. Thank you for watching the video to the end. I hope you had a good time. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. You'll discover plenty of other captivating videos waiting for you there.